The sky above Marineford buckles like heated glass, and the whole bay inhales. Sirens bite into the air, gulls scatter, and the plaza fills with white uniforms braced behind shield lines. Drums of the execution scaffold beat once, twice, and the camera lifts into the furnace glare, where smoke draws black calligraphy against the sun, and a figure in a dark blue marine coat stands on the siege wall with his hands balled into fists. He wears no epaulets yet. The coat is a promise more than a rank, the back painted with the kanji for justice. His straw hat is gone from this world, somewhere in the path not taken. But a red band of cloth wraps his left wrist tight enough to leave an imprint. A strip of hardened fabric singed along one edge. A small relic of a training ground where magma hissed, and the boy learned to stand. He is 17. He is laughing under his breath like someone facing an impossible hill and feeling the muscles wake. They call him Luffy of G1, cadet captain of a special unit Sakazuki molded out of heat and pressure. The man who raised him stands on the central dais below the scaffold, hands in pockets, cap-brimmed shadowing eyes that never relax. The sea breaks. A wall of water rears up with a groan, and the camera drops into its shadow as a fleet shoulders through the tide. Whitebeard's banner cracks like thunder. The Moby Dick shoulders apart slabs of ice, and earthquakes ripple under the bay as Pops leans forward on his Bicento and grins at the fortress, his mustache as absurd and defiant as the ship heaves beneath him. The broadcast Denden Mushi swivel, eyes glinting, and plates of transponder metal capture the moment for 1,000 taverns, courts, war rooms. "Commence bombardment," says Sengoku, voice cool as the bell that rings. Cannon lines kick, plumes of smoke roll. Kizaru flashes into the air as a lance of sunlight. Aokiji raises a sleeve and breathes winter into summer, and Akainu, in that slow patience of magma before it bursts, tilts his head towards the boy on the wall. "Your orders are simple," he had said earlier in the staging chambers lined with maps and steel. "Hold the siege line, disrupt any breach. This is justice." "Yes, sir," Luffy had answered, eyes on Ace's name inked on a chalkboard, heart stuttering once like he'd missed a step on a staircase. Now, as the quake split the bay and the first Titans leap from the Whitebeard fleet, Luffy drops from the wall into the plaza, and the ground accepts him like a drum. Marines roll forward on the flanks, Pacifista eyes burning yellow in the haze. Sentomaru slaps his axe into his palm. "Oi, Luffy!" he barks, shoulders hunched. "Keep your head. Don't play hero." "I won't," Luffy says, which is a lie he tells like a prayer. Fire cut. Crosstalk of Denden Mushi. Civilians leaning toward fat screen snails. A child clutching a wooden sword. Cutaway. 5 elders bent over a polished table, candles guttering oddly in calm air. The divergence in this world begins years earlier, when smoke rolled over Gray Terminal, and a marine inspection patrol stumbled over a scrawny kid with bruised knuckles and eyes too bright to be safe. Sakazuki had watched the boy glare at a burned patch of forest, as if he could stitch trees back together by will, and something unpleasant and practical had clicked in his chest. He took the boy from the East Blue for processing into the Naval Academy, over Garp's objections and Dragon's invisibly clenched fists somewhere beyond the horizon. "A stray dog can be trained," Sakazuki had said. "Better than leaving it to become a wolf." He drilled Luffy until bones hummed, punished softness like a disease, taught him that pirates tear families apart with laughter in their throats. And for a while, the boy tried to shape himself to the mold because he needed a father-sized place to stand. But a stubborn flame lit inside the rigid coal. Luffy learned to say, "sir," and stand in line and clench down on hunger during forced drills. But he also stole rice balls to feed kitchen cats and picked fights with bullies 2 ranks up and spent nights hanging from the underside of the pier to feel the tide pull him out and bring him back, as if freedom were a tide whose rhythm he could memorize without betraying anyone. On the plaza, that rhythm finds him. He darts into the first scrum before the Pacifista's fire, arms blurring as he snaps a giant's ankle sideways and slingshots away from a sword sweep that hisses past his nose. He doesn't kill. He incapacitates. A heel to a temple, an elbow to a throat. Rubber muscles turned into whipcord precision. A Marine sergeant gawks. "That's Sakazuki's ward," he mutters. "Huh, I thought he'd be different." "Different how?" whispers Tashigi, glasses fogging in the mist, sword held just right. "A dog without a tongue," the sergeant says, and they both flinch as a quake wave flexes under them. Ace stands on the scaffold with sea-stone cuffs biting his wrists, face bruised, smile thin and sideways, as if he refuses to gift anyone the relief of seeing him break. He sees the coat and the youthful figure moving like a bullet, and a question scalds up his throat. He had heard rumors in Impelled Down's darkness. A Marine kid who laughs when he fights, who won't take credit, who calls a volcanic mountain old man when no one hears. He had thought, no, that's not my brother, because in the story in his head, Luffy wears a straw hat and chases meat and sunlight. But rumors are the shape of the world knocking. Now the world knocks loud. Ace's fingers curl white around the scaffold rail. Hancock watches from the warlord line with her chin tilted. When the boy's profile swings toward her, something uncontrolled blooms in her chest. Love doesn't ask permission to be ridiculous. She'd planned to act alone for him, to smuggle what she could smuggle, but here he is in the wrong coat, and her heart chooses a side without caring about epaulets. The battle finds its rhythm, then falters, because Whitebeard's first quake tears the bay floor. Ships buck like startled horses. The first breach opens at Oris Square, where the ice bridge moans under footfall, and Luffy makes it there in 3 leaps, calling orders that surprise even him. "Pacifistas stagger fire," he yells. "Don't roast our own." Sentomaru grunts and adjusts. He's used to Luffy's knack for turning chaos into a weird order. Marco vaults from a foremast with blue flame wings and smiles like a knife. "Little Marine," he says, voice musical. "You move like someone who forgot how to be afraid." Luffy skids, toes sending chips off ice. He grins back. "I remember," he says. "I just don't like it." They clash in a flash. Birdclaw meets rubber knuckle wrapped in the thin, dark sheen of armament. A trick Luffy learned under flinty eyes that said, "No painkillers until you hold it for 10 seconds. Marco winces. Not at the strength, but at the choice to pull the punch. The boy isn't trying to brutalize. He's trying to make room. "You're holding back," Marco says, landing, flames healing the scuff. "I'm not your enemy," Luffy says, and the plaza has no time for that line to settle before a beam of light lances close. Kizaru floats, legs crossed, bored smile a blade's edge. "Oh," he drawls, "Sakazuki-kun's little prodigy. How troublesome. How fast are you, young one?" "Fast enough to be too late," an old voice says in Luffy's head that sounds like Garp when he laughed after hurling a cannonball at a seagull. He moves, and the camera stutters to keep up as he flips over a phalanx, grabs a marine shield, and twists it under his feet like a skateboard. The light beam hits steel. It vaporizes. Luffy's eyebrows singe. His teeth show in a grin that would be dumb anywhere but here. He pushes off, and the shield cartwheels into the bay. He lands, and the ground buckles again. "Stop playing," Sentomaru snaps, pushing him toward the inner corridor. They're going for the scaffold. "Everyone's going for the scaffold," Luffy says. He hears the drum again, a little faster now. He doesn't know why it sounds like a heartbeat echoing from somewhere too big for his chest. He stands very still for 1/2 second, eyes tracking not men, but currents, the pull of bodies toward the execution platform, the push of marine formations against pirates, the choke points where people will be crushed rather than cut. It's almost like he can see the plaza as a board with pieces and strings and tides, and if he plucks, things will move. "I'm cutting through," he says to no one in particular. "Cover me." Kuma's paw prints thud, sending shockwaves. Doflamingo dances up from behind a melted chunk of ice, pink feathers shedding frost. "Fufufu," he laughs, fingers twitching as invisible threads snap toward Luffy's ankles. "Puppies on strings. I want to see how you bend." Luffy twists at the last instant, ankle catching, knee spinning, and rides the strings tug into a pivot that carries him out of the kill arc and smashes his heel into a stone block. The block shoots up like a flipped table, intercepts the thread, and Doflamingo's grin loses a tooth of humor. "Oh, interesting." Aokiji watches the boy from a tower, expression slow and sad as thawing ice. "He's improvising against the pattern," the Admiral says, almost to himself. "Sakazuki raises hammers. That kid is a spring." "Springs break," Sakazuki says, stepping up beside him. He does not look at Kuzan. He looks at Luffy, threading a needle no one else can see. And when they do, they hurt people. "Wasn't the entire point of scooping him up to avoid those people being on the wrong side?" Kuzan asks, and Sakazuki's jaw hardens. "Better a dog on a leash than a wolf in the woods," he says. "And if the dog is a lion?" Kuzan murmurs. Sengoku calls for the broadcast to focus on the scaffold. The world needs a story. The transponder snails whistle. He lifts his arms, and his voice rolls down like a sermon. He shares the name of the condemned, the blood of the pirate king in Ace's veins, the unforgivable symbol of the age of pirates. And there is a play written on the elder's polished table, where a marine boy wearing justice would turn toward the cameras, denounce blood ties, hammer home that law breaks destiny to keep people safe. Cutaway, a gnarled hand tapping a cane against ivory. The world gets a different line reading. The camera loves Luffy, can't help it. He throws the kind of silhouette that makes eyes widen. When his face turns toward the scaffold while Sengoku speaks, anger and love fight there in naked light. Civilians in bars lean forward. Revolutionaries in basements go still. In the corner of the warlord line, Hancock presses a small sea stone key into the palm of a gloved officer who looks the other way at exactly the right time. That officer passes it down a line of hands, corrupt, loyal, confused, until it burns in the pocket of a nondescript marine running toward the inner corridor with a tray of ammunition. Moments later, a prisoner disguised under a pie plate in bravado picks it from his pocket with the impossible luck of a clown blessed by a camera. "Aha," Buggy whispers to himself, throwing a wink up toward invisible acclaim. "World's greatest star." The ice bridge near Oris Square collapses under a quake. Luffy hurls himself forward, as if he can put the stone back with his own body. The wind tears, the view expands into vertigo, and then it snaps to slow-mo impact. As his palm catches the lip of a broken pillar and elastics flood his arm, bone and muscle, singing a chorus he learned alone on a winter pier when he finally convinced his body that it could trust a fall. He swings, boots skimming foam, lands on a drifting slab already coated with frost, and skims the moat with a speed that yanks the cameras back toward him like leashes. He makes the inner corridor under the scaffold, and the air in there feels like a throat. Prisoners here in shackles smell of impelled down. Marines posted here look like boys trying to be locks. The nondescript Marine with the ammo tray breaks his left step fractionally to avoid collision, and the key, small, sea stone, kissed by destiny. If you listen to bards, tumbles. Mr. Three's wax flickers in the lamplight 3 steps away, his face a parfait of fear and calculation. Luffy's hand snatches the key out of air without looking. He doesn't plan this. He wants to. There are 100 plans stacked in his head. What Sakazuki would say. What Garp would laugh at. What Dragon would have never told him. But what happens is a vibration under his sternum that climbs, and he steps into a space like a drop of ink expanding in water. The corridor's stone breathes. It's obscene for a second, like the world flexed its ribs. He sees a future where he pushes this too far and becomes something the admirals all consider an enemy at once. So he takes only what he must. The pillars soften, just enough for him to slip between guarding ranks like a breath through cloth. A Marine reaches and grabs rubber instead of boy. Fingers stretch and then snap back without pain. What? The Marine gasps, and Luffy touches his shoulder and says, "I'll pay you back later," without knowing how to pay for anything this big. He bursts from the corridor into light, smoke and cannon thunder wrapping him like a cloak. The scaffold stairs stitch sky to stone. Garp sits there like a mountain, chin in hand, eyes closed as if he could undream this war. They open. They find his grandson's face in marine blue and search it with an ache so deep it has no language. Luffy takes the steps 2 at a time and stops 2 steps short, because the body cannot outrun an old man's sorrow. "Move, Garp," Luffy says, voice steady like he borrowed it from a better world. Garp's fists creak. "You picked a hard road," he says. "Whatever you do now, it won't get easier." "It never does," Luffy says. He pitches a tiny smile that always managed to disarm the cook ladies who smuggled him dumplings when Sakazuki made meal times a test. "But I'm going to keep moving, Gramps." Garp throws the punch the world knows he throws. It comes like a tidal boulder, mojo of the fist, the thing that built Marines out of brats and laughter out of broken teeth. Luffy leans into it. He accepts some of it on his forehead, coating bones in that thin black gloss he learned on a training yard at dawn with knuckles bleeding, and he slides around the angle instead of trying to shatter it. He doesn't hammer his grandfather in the face. He taps his shoulder, a touch like a bell that rings down the old man's arm and tells his joints it's time to rest. Garp sits down. Not a collapse, a choice. "Go," he says. Luffy doesn't say thank you because he is already there. The scaffold platform tilts under the weight of history. Sengoku turns, form magnifying, righteous fury and aura. Luffy's eyes find Ace's wrists, the cuffs burning like winter. Ace stares, jaw set, pain and pride arguing in his pupils. "You idiot," Ace says, voice torn. "What are you doing here in that coat?" Saving my brother, Luffy says, holding up a key that isn't supposed to be here and jamming it into the lock, hands moving slick fast because the heartbeat is back. Too loud now. Drums of something he doesn't want to name slapping the inside of his reality. The key bites, turns, the cuff falls. The second follows. Ace's hands are his own again. He flexes fingers like someone waking up. Sengoku roars, literally roars, and Haki hits like an invisible avalanche. Luffy's teeth ring, the platform tilts, Marines shout, pirates howl, cameras drink it. 5 elders lean in. Seize him, Sengoku thunders, and Kizaru obliges, light arrows already drawing a dotted line through Luffy's chest. Ace moves first. He steps between Light and Boy, fire blooming. It's a reflex older than prison and smarter than pride. You cover your little brother. Light meets flame, and marine iron groans as the platform buckles under legendary figures colliding. Then Sakazuki is there. No longer slow lava, but the thing lava becomes when the crust breaks. His coat flares, cap shadow deepening until it devours everything soft. Luffy, he says, and the name sounds like a verdict filed. Don't force me to correct you. You already did, Luffy says, breath hitching like he ran upstairs too fast, and the air decided to be a much heavier thing. He puts Ace behind him with a palm-back gesture that Ace ignores. You taught me to never leave a threat unchecked. I won't leave that belief unchecked either. You always had too much mouth, Sakazuki says. He walks like a landslide fed by a volcano. Prove your loyalty. Kill him. He points to Ace. The words suck heat out of the day. Gasps ripple across platoons. Kobe goes pale. Tashigi's hands wobble on her sword. The camera feels faces. Marines who wanted a clean narrative. Pirates who did not expect this kink in the chain. Civilians who do not breathe at all. Cutaway. 5 elders dicing options in their eyes. Either the dog bites its own blood or it bites its handler. Both cuts feed the image machinery. No, Luffy says. He is shaking, and then he isn't. Something ancient flips a sign in his chest, from boy to drum. It is not Gear Second's steam that rises, though blood surges and skin singes. It is not Gear Third's bone balloon, though the air seems to find more space inside him. The world around the scaffold flexes just barely, enough that the siege wall's iron banners droop as if they want to watch more easily. The flag behind Sengoku's head ripples like laughter in an empty hall. Ace blinks, startled by the wrongness of things feeling playful in a death yard. Luffy, he says, warning and plea. It doesn't last because the admirals are gravity. Aokiji throws a winter that cracks the cartoon. Kizaru pins light beams into a net. Sakazuki throws a fist, and the fist is a mountain's heart turned liquid. Luffy reaches between light and ice and lava and grabs a piece of the world and makes it bouncy on instinct alone. Kizaru's beam hits the rubber patch and ricochets up into the execution tower's bell, which peals like a shocked laugh. Marines jerk. Sengoku's jaw clenches. Akainu's magma fist slams down and finds a springy stone that swallows impact like a gulp. But it doesn't erase it. It only diverts it. The diverted shockwave smashes the siege buttress. Stone rains. Luffy sees 3 Marines under the falling slab, throws his arm long and wide, catches the slab on a rubber palm that sinks 3 inches and holds. His shoulder howls. He puts it down, and the cost starts to charge interest. Stop, he tells the drum quietly, and it hiccups and then slows, a heartbeat listening, only reluctantly. They run, not away from the war, but through it, a line scrawled by two brothers between an ocean and a doctrine. Marines try to close in on them, and Ace breathes heat corridors into the air, turning bullets to glitter. Pirates surge to cover them, and Marco's wings scorch arcane shapes that look like blessings on stone. Jinbe throws a wall of water with a fist, and it catches a hail of magma rocks and sinks them like sins in a river. Crocodile snarls and slices down a marine champion who would have stabbed Luffy in the spine. Then he spits at Whitebeard in habit and has to look away because the old man is smiling, like all this is what he signed up for. A voice like a distant storm rolls over everything. You think you can rewrite the law with laughter? Sakazuki says. He is walking in a straight line toward the brothers. Men who step between him and them melt in fight or fear. He smashes through a Pacifista accidentally, and the thing sputters. 2 minutes, Sengoku signals, eyes cutting angles for a trap inside the trap that failed. Bring down the siege walls, funnel them to the bay. Sink them. Giant chains rattle, gates grind. The walls move like the idea of safety closing. The bay narrows into a killing corridor. Luffy feels the funnel like a hand around his throat. He hates being choked. He pivots, not to the obvious gap, but to the gnarled path between a collapsed tower and a pile of broken cannons. Left, he yells, over the gun deck. They veer. Hancock appears for a breath in the chaos, kicks a marine who dared to aim at Luffy, and turns him to stone and pebbles him with a finger flick. She starts, too full. Just survive. Thanks, Luffy says like he would say to a cook for extra meat. It is insensitive and perfect. They burst onto the gun deck as Marines scramble to re-angle cannons, and then everything goes black. Not for them, but for the cameras. The broadcast cuts static as a cymbal crash of censorship blows through the transponder network. Across taverns and slums and royal viewing halls, the world shivers. Silence spreads like oil because people know that when the government turns off your eyes, it's because they don't trust you to see. Cutaway. A five elder gently closing a lid, whispering to a snail as if to a child. Hush now. The pause is brief. Images stutter back. Wrong angles. Someone forgot to mute the sound of a producer yelling. In that glitch, the war becomes more real than narrative. You see Marines bleeding, and pirates holding each other up, and a cadet captain cursing because his shoulder won't rotate anymore. You see Akainu stride through a field of settling ash like a statue set on fire and walking anyway. And under it, there is the new baseline, the quake of a different kind of arrival. Cannon smoke sloughs, and there stands Blackbeard at the bay mouth with hands splayed as if the castle were a card house and his fingers itched. His crew grins like knives carved from moldy bread. Say ha 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 ha. He laughs, a sound like a rotten rope snapping. He's not here for Ace anymore. He's here for carcasses and shadow fruit, and the final trick he's kept in his chest like a swallowed stone. Whitebeard hears him before he sees him. The old man sighs like a father at a child who won't wipe his feet. He plants the Bacento and shakes the world again in a way that will be remembered as long as people hate the sea. The quake hit lifts a ring of ships and throws them down safe. Somehow, Marco understands the trick and wants to cry. Whitebeard turns and looks to the brothers carving a line in smoke. He nods. His lips shape something like, "Go live." Sakazuki chooses the moment when the gate funnels aren't fully closed. He throws a magma dog across the gun deck. It bites at Ace with teeth of molten rock. Luffy hammers the dog's muzzle with a Haki fist that blackens like a brand. The dog bursts in sparks. He shakes his hand and feels skin blister. "Stop," he shouts, not at Sakazuki, but at Ace, who is turning back with fire fists clenched and a pride that got him into this story in the first place. "We don't need to—" "Get behind me," Ace says, the old reflex again, the one that stung when Luffy was little and felt like a cage. "No," Luffy says, and hooks Ace with an arm and drags him 3 feet right as a second magma dog tears where he was going to be. His observation picks up the heat bloom sooner this time, not by sight, but by the drum telling him where the cartoon would put a bite for dramatic timing. The drum is unreliable. It costs him veins. His heartbeat stumbles, then resumes. He tastes copper. Akainu steps up onto the gun deck, boots making the simplest sound. "You chose," he says. "So did you," Luffy says, and the camera's frame drops inside the fist he throws because the choreography of the world needs this beat to land. His arm bulks, not ballooned to dumbness, but banded with muscle and force. Haki flooding like ink into a brush. It meets magma, and there is a shriek somewhere between water on a skillet and a wind ripping a sail. The heat cooks his skin. He ignores every nerve. He punches his father in every way that word can mean, and Sakazuki doesn't move half a step. The Admiral's jaw flexes. His own fist returns in a mountain's rhythm. Luffy takes it on, forearms crossed. He slides. His heels dig grooves in the deck. "Run," Jinbe says in Ace's ear, and the fireman shakes him off because he is tired of running. He burned for a man who burned the world and found that legacy is a chain even when you hate it. He will break one today or reinforce it forever. He launches at Akainu with flame that howls his name, and the Admiral's face doesn't change, and his hand sinks into fire like a knife into meat that wanted to be eaten. Luffy catches Ace's shoulder mid-lunge and hauls him sideways. Akainu's magma finches hair, and the smell is a dog's yelp in the air. "Trust me," Luffy says in a voice so calm it surprises everyone. "Please, just this once, trust me to be the one who gets hit." Ace laughs then. Not nice, not sweet. "You're still my idiot brother," he says. "I hate this." He takes the back seat. He watches the angles because trusting someone you love can be a fight. They duck through a gap in a half-fallen wall. The bay yawns ahead with ships, chaos, and a submarine's periscope glinting like a wink. Law angles closer, calculating his own benefit with brisk bedside manner. He sees Luffy's trembling hands and Ace's edges going soft, and decides that saving future trouble is profitable. "Room," he says conversationally to no one yet, warming up. Blackbeard finally makes his play. He throws the darkness like a tarp over Whitebeard, and the old man shoves back with a quake that cracks the tarp and snaps like a sail in a storm. The crew leaps in, not men enough, then men enough, because the old man is dying in stitches already. "Pops!" Marco screams, and the sound refracts across the plaza into all the children who made themselves into pirates, to find fathers, and found monsters, and found men, anyway. Whitebeard plants his feet, and chooses a hill to die on. Not the scaffold, not the fortress, not the throne of the seas. He chooses a hill made of his children's backs, and his enemy's face. He swings and sends Blackbeard skidding across the bay like a rock on a lake. Teach laughs even as he gasps because it's better than anything he imagined. Then Teach stops laughing because the quake cracks take on a new grammar as he wraps a dead man's power around his own, like a stolen coat that almost fits. Shanks is not there yet. The day is still in its screaming. Sengoku shouts new orders with his jaw. "Sink the Moby," he snarls, but half the batteries are out, and the other half refuse to hit the ship that just shielded 3 marine skiffs from an errant quake. The story is stained and real now. Smoker snaps his jitte against his palm and glares around for law he can still enforce on a day when rules are nouns and verbs at once. "Kids," he growls when he spots Luffy, "you're all idiots." The final chain falls. The siege walls lock. The exit is a neck that will choke. Luffy takes a breath that shreds his lungs like paper and reaches for the drum. It says no because it likes being capricious. He smiles at it, a cruel little grin he learned from a cook who taught him to negotiate with boiling oil. He gives it something it wants, not to win, not to break the world open, but to make someone laugh. He stomps, and the gun deck under his feet squeaks like a rubber toy. The shock ripples across the boards. Cannons jump. Marines wobble. Aokiji blinks, and his breath fogs a tiny smile in the air. "You little," he says, almost amused despite everything. The playful bend carries into the choke point. The narrow mouth becomes a slide for 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, Jinbe throws water like a new god. Ace hurls flame along it like a ribbon, and Luffy grabs the sides and yanks the idea of exit wider. The cost is a pulsing pain behind his eyes that makes the world pixelate. Blood threads drip from his nose. His skin dulls. They tumble onto floating ice. Law's submarine kisses the edge like a whale offering a ride. "You owe me," he says, opening the hatch. "Both of you." "We'll pay with meat," Luffy says automatically, half-conscious, and to himself to stop being himself. Ace laughs again, and then coughs, and that cough will haunt Luffy for weeks. Sakazuki's hand slams onto the ice beside the hatch, as if magma could grow fingers. The heat hits their faces as a memory of cremations. "You think you can run," he says. "You think the sea forgives." "No," Luffy says. "I think it remembers." He kicks, not at the Admiral, but at the brittle piece of ice on which the magma glove balances. It breaks. Sakazuki sinks an inch, then stands, because his power makes its own footholds. The pause is enough. The hatch slams. Water folds. The submarine sinks like a coin dropped in a fountain where people wish for different futures. On the surface, Whitebeard is dying into a legend. He falls standing because that's the picture the world needs, and he is generous even now. Blackbeard preens and then jerks because a red-haired emperor walks out of sunlight like he invented truce. Shanks's cloak ripples that specific way that makes swords lose their nerve. He looks at Sakazuki, at Sengoku, at the blood rivers and the boys already gone from the field. "End it," he says, voice easy, eyes not. Sengoku breathes a long breath through his nose like a bull. He sees the calculus, the costs already paid, and the ones not worth the interest. He raises a palm. "War's over," he says, and the word sounds less like victory than like the ending of a song you sang too loudly too long. Akainu stares at the place where the submarine went under as if he could harden the water with hate. "He was my instrument," he says, a strange confession. "I tuned him." "You don't tune wind," Kuzan says quietly. He flexes his fingers to thaw them and puts his hands in his pockets so no one sees him make a fist. It's smarter than you. Shanks walks past 1,000 little tragedies and puts his hand on the scaffold where the cuffs dangle empty. He smiles a rueful smile at Garp. Grandkids choose odd uncles, he says. Garp snorts something that might be a laugh and might be a sob and refuses to let either escape. He never listened, he says. He listened too much. The broadcast crawls back online to inform the world that justice prevailed and the son of the pirate king was almost lawfully executed, and the traitor marine who aided his escape will be hunted down and cleansed. Taverns hear both lies and truths and pick the ones that make sense to their rent and their dead. Posters print. A coat is burned in a warehouse, so history gets a clean picture of what color betrayal wears. The 5 elders sit very still in their candle room and decide on punishments and promotions. Sengoku will step down soon. Akainu will not. The machine cannot help but double down when embarrassed. On a beach miles away, the submarine opens like a cracked egg, and a surgeon curses in a measured way while bandaging nerves to bone and telling the patient to stop trying to sit up. Luffy looks terrible. Ace looks like fire cooled to a dull glow. Jinbe lies like a felled tree and insists on getting up to get water for everyone else. Law rolls his eyes. Children, he informs the empty air. All of you. Luffy wakes in a fever at dusk when the light throws long gold spears into the cave. He reaches for his left wrist out of habit, finds the red cloth band, and squeezes until his fingertips go white. Ace wakes because his brother's breath changes and stares up at the cave roof until his own breath stops being a stone on his chest. You threw away everything, he says, not sure if it's accusation or thanks. Not everything, Luffy says, and it sounds like a joke until Ace realizes that to Luffy, throwing away a coat is not throwing away the idea of protecting people. He looks tired and stubborn. He looks 17 and older. He looks like a dog that slipped its leash and is already wondering what house to guard now. I kept you, he adds, and Ace says a word that isn't a word and burns a little hotter, and then lets himself be a brother again. News spreads like rot and seed both. Some islands cheer that a marine defied a tyrant. Some spit and say, see, they were always rotten with pirate blood. Bounties shift. A new poster flaps against a dock pole in a wind that smells of salt and rumor. Monkey D. Luffy, traitor to justice, 500 million and rising. Smile too bright. Coat missing. The Marines in cafeterias argue whether he was a mistake or a test run. Smoker smokes more. Tashigi cleans her glasses and trains twice as hard. Kobe sleeps badly and decides that justice is a verb, not a noun, and that someday he will argue with men like Sakazuki with his fists and with words. Hancock smiles into her pillow and declares war on despair. The Revolutionary Army changes a map, their leader's eyes unreadable, except when he stares at a point on the ocean where a submarine dived. On a ruined pier, Akainu stands alone with smoke rising from his shoulders, like the idea of hell losing patience. He looks at the horizon and imagines hammering it into a straight line. Next time, he says, not loud, promise and threat in one breath. I end it with my own hands. On another shore, Luffy drapes the burned blue coat over driftwood and watches it burn down with a small smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Ace stands beside him, wind pushing hair into his face. What now? Ace asks. Now we make our own flag, Luffy says, voice like a kid planning a picnic and a prisoner choosing a door. His heartbeat is normal. Somewhere deep in the world, a drum waits, patient as a tide. And we make sure it stands for something worth punching for. He squints at the horizon until it squints back. Also, we get a lot of meat. He laughs. Ace laughs. The fire pops and sends up a single ember that rides the night air into a sky already shifting because a coat burned in Marineford, and a man with a red hair walked out of light and said enough, and a boy raised by a volcano chose to bend the ground instead of people. And somewhere a Denden Mushi tucked itself under a bar and slept, dreaming of a laugh that sounded like freedom asking for a fight. Night swallows the flame until only a red line glows under the ash, and the surf chews at the black. The brothers sleep in shifts, with Jinbe between them like a tide wall, Law outside the cave with his sword across his knees, and a surgeon's patience simmering under a captain's irritation, and somewhere beyond the breakers, a submerging shadow glides in lazy circles, as if guarding or casing a target. Morning comes in a salt-sour hush. Luffy wakes to gulls picking at kelp and the weight of a dream where the plaza kept bending under his feet until he fell into a wide white room, and a hand put a finger on his forehead and told him to pick one name and live under it forever. He sits up slow. The world tilts right, then settles. Ace snores the snores of the freshly unchained. Jinbe's eyes open without the rest of him moving. You trembled in your sleep, straw hat. He stops himself and smiles at the correction only he hears. Luffy. I was arguing with a drum, Luffy says, rubbing the red cloth at his wrist like it might have an answer folded inside. I think it won. He grins to knock the edge off the words and then breathes out when the grin doesn't hold. We have to go, he adds, the urgency landing with a soft thud because he isn't sure where yet. Agreed, Law says, standing with a vertebrae pop roll of shoulders. The Marines will sweep this chain in hours. I did not patch you and your brother for you to die on my doorstep. He jabs a thumb toward the submarine. Get in the car. They travel under the skin of the sea, the sub a whispering lung. Law's crew moves around them like good ghosts. Beppo stares at Luffy with damp-eyed bear concern until Law clears his throat and the bear pretends to be stern. Ace paces small, furious circles and then catches himself and laughs because the habit of cages takes time to shake. Luffy eats, then eats again, each bite slow so his insides don't topple. Jinbe meditates with the ease of a man who made peace with his own tide long ago, and knows peace is a thing you have to keep mending like a net. The radio crackles with the tone no one likes, the government's chewable voice. A tinny announcer proclaims that the world has witnessed the steadfastness of justice, that pirates scatter like roaches at dawn, that a dangerous marine experiment failed and will be excised. Luffy hears himself described as a hybrid error, and something in his jaw hums. Turn it off, Ace says. No, Luffy says. Turn it up. He listens to the approved adjectives and files them in a place labeled fuel. The announcer uses Dragon's name once in a way that tries to make it a slur and instead makes it taste like a dare. Law glances over, eyes flicking like a metronome across Luffy's face, taking measurements that aren't purely medical. They surface by night beneath a shroud of fog off an island that smells of paper and smoke. Sabaody Archipelago reels from news and scars. Grove lights cast sickly halos through the mist. Bubbles pop on branches like gentle explosions. Law points them to a hidden berth where a shipwright with a laugh like a cough sells patched ropes and no questions. 2 days, Law says. Then I want you gone. Not because I don't enjoy the thrill of harboring high value fugitives, but because the thrill will call an admiral. Thanks, Luffy says simply, and Law's mouth twitches in a way that might be respect wearing a sardonic disguise. They keep to the back alleys where bubbles drift like dandelion seeds, and the sound Sabaody makes is different now. More knives in it, more whispers about cameras. Posters paste wet to trunks. Sengoku's statements rendered into clean font. Blackbeard's face magnified into a grin that looks wider every time you look. Whitebeard's mustache stenciled into graffiti halos round alleys where kids sit with hollow bellies and dream about flags. At the coatless edge of a mangrove plaza, a projector snail shows sanitized replay. Cameras turned away at key moments. Sound dipped when Garp sat down and when the scaffold bent. Because the angles are wrong, the truth leaks through like water around a finger. A couple of dockhands watch, faces pinched. One spits. Traitor, he says sourly, and the word hangs oddly in the air, as if it doesn't know which direction to point. A dozen Marines in plain clothes slouch by with the particular swagger of men waiting to impress someone. Tashigi shadows them, glasses gleaming, spine straight as her sword. Smoker stomps at her side, cloak clapping like a sullen sail. His jite taps his shoulder. His eyes find Luffy in the crowd because Smoker's eyes are magnets to trouble, wearing honesty on its face. He could shout. He doesn't. He flicks ash into the projector snail's face. The image hiccups. Then he jerks his chin toward a shadowed path. If you're going to run, he says without moving his mouth, do it along the route without children on it. Luffy salutes him with 2 fingers over his brow. So quick it's a joke and a thank you at once, and slides. Ace goes the other way to peel watchers off. Jinbe lifts a crate like it weighs air and walks with a fisherman's slouch. Law patches the picture with presence alone. He doesn't try to be invisible. He makes being seen look like a mistake. They dodge a warlord's informant with a notebook and smile, duck a bubble vendor with a memory for faces, slip around a preacher telling a cluster of ragged men that the war is proof God loves the orderly. Luffy wants to argue and keeps walking because today isn't for converting anyone. He keeps seeing the moment the world bent under his hand. The bell he made ring with a light beam and a joke, and he wonders if that bell will toll again when it should or when it shouldn't. They make it to a pad where a coat with a boa crest waits coiled like a cat on the deck. Hancock stands with her back to them and turns as if she felt Luffy's gaze like sunlight. Her smile is a sunrise and a warning. What you are doing is extremely foolish, she says in a tone that also says, please don't stop. That's our favorite kind, Ace says, tipping an imaginary hat. The ship whisks them south under cover of charm and illegal wind, and the Kuja sisters give Ace looks that make him feel like a bonfire at a festival, and Luffy looks that make Hancock's posture turn militant. They leave Luffy and Ace on a nameless strip where the tide scribbles a ledger line, and they vanish into a gauze of gulls before the horizon can remember their shape. Morning. Their taste like bread someone else baked and sugar someone hid. The island is small but busy, all seaside muscle and cartwheels, with a bell in the square that rings at dawn and dusk to make the hours remember they belong to people. The bartender stares too long at Luffy's face, then pours a mug big as his forearm and tells him to finish it in one swallow if he doesn't want to be recognized. Luffy tries, chokes, laughs beer out his nose, and the spell breaks because it's hard to reconcile a poster with a mess. The bartender leans in. "What you did on that scaffold," he says, whisper almost lost under the clatter of mugs. "My boy saw the feed. You made a wall soft. You didn't break a man's skull. Remember that." "I can't forget it," Luffy says, rubbing at the bridge of his nose where the blood had ticked. He stares at the bell rope in the square and thinks about ringing it for the joy of noise. Ace elbows him. "Don't," he says. "Every time you see a bell, you look like a cat staring at a curtain." They rest 2 days. Ace paces out a perimeter only he can see, counting chain links that aren't there. Jinbe teaches some kids to tie knots that won't fail in storms. Luffy eats and naps and sits very still sometimes, listening to whether any drum tries to get clever. And when it does, he refuses it with a stubborn grin and a mental kick. And the refusal hurts like a cramp the first time and less the fifth. Law drops in by night to change Luffy's bandages and say snide things about idiocy hiding under charm. He brings news in his mouth like a coin. "Bounties up," he says softly. "Not just yours. The Navy will redecorate command in the next month. The word is Sakazuki will take the chair. Kuzan doesn't smile about it." "Will they come here?" Ace asks, fingers on his cup. "They'll go where the story can be enhanced," Law says. "If I were them, I'd trap you on an island and light it up with a buster call, then sell a narrative about cleansing corruption and cutting Hydra heads. They care for theater." "They'll follow me before they follow Ace," Luffy says. He grins without heat. "I'm the better headline." "You're the better bait," Law says. His eyes say, "Please don't be brave in the dumb way." They don't get a third day. The Marines arrive not with an admiral first, but with an apology. A neat officer with a hairline like a ruler. And smile like polite steel requests an audience with the town elders. He offers to sweep the island gently for dangerous elements on the government's dime, framed as goodwill, framed as making sure war skims and doesn't pool. Behind him, a ship's guns glint under covers. The bell rings. Not alarm, the regular one. The regular refuses to break, and so the abnormal must. Luffy walks into the square wearing a borrowed cloak that smells like fish and a posture that says damp rope. Ace melts into shadows on the right. Jinbe sits on a stoop with a chip of wood and a knife carving a fish that remembers water. Law is already hidden in a medical tent doing a surgeon impression. The officer gives his tidy speech. Tidy speeches have edge because they cut before anyone notices. He uses words like cleanse and safety and loyalty. He calls Luffy a contagion, and Ace a symbol, and the town a responsible actor. He offers to leave in an hour if his men can verify compliance. "We don't have much to comply with," the fisherman elder says mildly. "We have nets and late pay." The officer smiles, as if amused by a dog with a trick. His men fan out. A boy tries to help by pointing too eagerly at a shed where Ace is not. Luffy feels his belly solidify into intent. He could leave. They came in light. The island will bake under scrutiny, and then cool, but he watches the officer's hand linger on the bell rope, as if measuring how loud it would ring when pulled by a foreign palm. He hears the memory scrape in the air when an island's little customs get replaced by big, sanctioned ones. The heartbeat that day in Marineford thumps. 2, 3, then calms like a sea after a wind. He doesn't need it for this. He needs good hands and better aims. He steps to the center square. "I'm here," he says, voice unadorned. Heads jerk. Ace mutters a word that would make a priest jump. The officer pinches the bridge of his nose as if enjoying a private headache. "Monkey D. Luffy," he recites. "You are under arrest on charges of treason, sedition, piracy, and the unlawful conjugation of..." He stops because Luffy is already moving, not toward him, but toward the bell. He grabs the rope and yanks like a boy who woke up early to prank a village, and the bell screams joy into the town. Everyone flinches. Luffy stops it with a hand. Jam. Catch. Hold. He looks at the officer over the bell's bronze rim and smiles like a kindly clerk. "Sorry," he says. "We start with this here. Makes the day proper." He lets it go. The rope shivers. The officer's face cracks around the edges. Something about the insolence being so domestic makes it worse. "Seize him," he says, regretful, as if forced to put down a harmless dog. Marines step. Ace's fire sketches a don't line. Jinbe flips his knife and stands. Not tall, not menacing, just in the way. The first wave comes with training and bad information. Luffy shortens space, not reality, just distance, throwing a rubber line like a tape measure and closing it in a snap that pulls a man off balance into a gentle concussion. He softens stone under a boot just enough to make a heel wobble and a swing miss. He pulls a barrel lid up into a shield and lets bullets thunk into wood, then kicks it back like a spun coin. He ducks, weaves, laughs once, because he's alive in the stretch, and he's making sure no one dies for a sentence someone wrote. The officer realizes something and makes the choice. He signals. The covered guns lift their tarps like well-trained dogs. Jinbe's eyes narrow. He calculates trajectories. He calculates water. The island has no walls. It has a tide. "Now," he says, and Luffy hears it. Palms slapping together in a way that would be comic until you see the dignity of the stance. He slams his palms to the cobbles, and everything rubberizes in a circle 5 paces wide. The first cannonball hits the square and bounces like a child's ball over roofs, thuds harmlessly into a sand dune outside town, and explodes into a harmless bloom that frightens crabs. The crowd exhales on a stumbling laugh it didn't know it held. The second shot comes, and Jinbe throws his water like a wall, and the ball sinks with a gloomy plop. The officer's neat hair droops. "Stop!" he yells, and to his credit, the guns stop. He is not an admiral. He is a man whose career just sprouted a crack. He reassesses. "This island will be designated as under temporary government protection," he says tightly. "Curfew at dusk. All ships will be inspected. You will not find sanctuary." "I don't need sanctuary," Luffy says. "I need lunch." He says it to give the island something to do besides panic. The fisherman elder bursts out laughing and claps Luffy on the back, and that small social decision takes heat out of the square like a lid on a pot. They leave that afternoon because the island has to live with itself tomorrow, and you don't make that easier by becoming a campsite. In the shallows, before the boat pushes off, Jinbe looks at Luffy with a seized frown. "You bend things," he says. "Careful you don't convince yourself. You can always bend them back." "I'm not trying to make the world into a toy," Luffy says. He throws a rock, and it skips, then sinks. I'm trying not to let people get squeezed into weapons. Their path lines ragged across a map. Small coves, an old revolutionary cache on an island where the trees have knife leaves and the streams run sweet. A whale-shaped rock where Shanks once drank and left a cork in a crack that some kid now treasures as if it were gold. They stand on the rock at dusk. The wind hauls spray across their faces. A sea king's back humps far out, ogre smooth. Jinbe tells a story without names about a kingdom that banned laughter and how the fishermen there had to go to sea to hear their own mouths loosen. Ace stares at the horizon until it blinks first. Law attends them off and on, like an orbit with an odd period, always in motion, a clinical comet. He prods Luffy to test reflexes, murmurs about nerve conduction, notes when the heartbeat goes odd, and how long it takes to settle. He doesn't ask what it is. He isn't sure he wants a myth in his notes. He tells them when Marines move, where Akainu plants his next fists. The world begins to shape around Sakazuki the way heat shapes desert air. In Marineford, the 5 elders meet with a plate of grapes they don't eat and a wall of maps they do. Sengoku stands in front of them with his resignation, trying to decide whether to be dignified or loud. "You're making a mistake," he says. "Kuzan has a heart that sees people. Sakazuki has a fire that sees rules. Rules are what keep the world from gnawing off its own fingers," says the one with the curved sword. "You've had your era, Sengoku. It was competent. This one will be decisive." "You'll get numbers," Sengoku says. "You might lose meaning." "Meaning is not a metric," the tallest says. "Numbers are." They install Sakazuki with a ceremony that sounds like shackles closing. He stands with blood under his nails and doesn't try to clean it because violence left unadorned is a message in itself. He stares at a wall where someone hung a painting of a calm sea. He orders it removed and replaced with a map of islands colored by compliance. He sets bounties, like weather. He creates a special task unit with a sharp acronym and a mandate to cut rot. He assigns Smoker to a post far from the center, because he doesn't like honest men where wedges need to slip. He calls Kobe a child and sends him to a school for fine doctrine. Kobe goes and then sneaks out to run extra drills where he punches a wall until it flinches. Garp turns down a promotion and a punishment in the same sentence and goes fishing with a ferocity that scares fish. He does not go to Windmill Village because the walls talk there, and he isn't ready to hear what they say about grandsons. Blackbeard blooms like mold in warm bread. He eats islands. He swallows pieces of the new world that belong to no one and everything. He lifts flags off corpses and stitches them to his own, and laughs with a throat that knows no tenderness. Marco fights him and gets tired in a bone way that flame can't heal. Vista crosses swords and calls it a draw, because neither of them wants that day yet. Jozu still bleeds diamond chips when he laughs, and the crew who call themselves sons and daughters of a dead man make a family out of grief and knives. They whisper about a rumor that the marine brat who bent a scaffold is out there bending small things to make big ones break less. "If we see him," a scarred man says, nostalgic and raw, "we give him drink, and a punch, and a thank you." They will, not today. Shanks docks at a slope where roses grow in black soil and claps a hand to Whitebeard's gravestone like a sailor to a mast. "Old man," he says, "I covered your tab. Keep the chair warm." His crew laughs around him with the ease of men who aren't afraid to share air. Ben Beckman smokes and considers bad math. Yasop wonders if somewhere a boy with straw-colored hair is raising a cup and not giving it back. Lucky Roo eats and then offers the last bite to no one. Shanks's eyes find the horizon in that irritating way that makes the horizon blush. "We'll keep the kids from drowning," he says, which doesn't mean he'll keep them from swimming near sharks. The world calls the brothers to a choice. The Marines bait a trap on an island called Habu, where the government built a research lab that studies criminal physiology. The lab collects numbers about pirate lineage factor and writes them on whiteboards in onerous little scripts. Civilians on Habu grow peppers and are proud of their boats. A rumor says the lab holds a file about Ace and a seed about Luffy, and also a ship full of children being moved to a rehabilitation camp for families of pirates. The rumor arrives wrapped in a revolutionary letter with a smear of squid ink and dragon's brevity. Ace wants to burn the lab. Luffy wants to break the ferry carrying the children. The revolutionaries want both in a way that asks other people to do both. Law wants to not want anything and fails. They plan like amateurs with luck on their side and professionals with a hole in their chest. Jinbe will take the dock at the north where the peppers come in so no one flees to the boats and drowns. Ace will hit the lab at the south like a god from the sun. Luffy will hit the ferry in the middle like a disaster clown and make it a rescue. Law will be the scalpel that makes both messes cleaner. Timing will be a string. If it holds, no one dies. If it frays, some do. They all agree to, at minimum, not die themselves. They arrive at dawn under a veil of dragonflies. The lab squats on a dune like a white spider. The dock yawns like a tongue. The ferry whistles like a kettle left on a stove in a busy kitchen. Soldiers in blue and white and neat boots march in angles. Scientists in coats with pens like knives glance at clipboards. Children line up with bags too heavy for their backs, some brave-faced grinning, some already learning quiet as a language. Luffy sees them, and his chest becomes a drum again, and he says, "Not now," and the drum sulks, and then agrees, because the moment is too sharp for broad jokes. He moves like a rumor. One guard looks left, another looks right, and Luffy is already past them, a shadow that smells faintly of meat. He pops onto the ferry like a rabbit out of a hat and waves at a little girl whose eyes go saucer round. "Hi," he says, and then his arm is into the railing and around and back, and the knot holding the ferry's line sap snaps like a dry twig. The ferry drifts. The pilots panic because drifts are deaths if tides own you. "Shh," Luffy tells the tide, or maybe himself. He grabs the dock with his other hand and pulls. The dock protests. The wood bends. He smells the pennies in his nose again and swears at the drum and holds. Ace's first blast hits the lab, and the panicked scream of a building on fire peals across the square. Marines run in the wrong directions. Scientists clutch clipboards like saints clutch icons. Law appears quietly inside a guard checkpoint and removes a man's gun without removing his finger and leaves him staring at an empty palm, reconsidering life. Jinbe steps into the dock like a punctuation mark and says in a voice that makes men recalculate, "No one moves their boats. No one does." A single precise thing breaks the clean chaos. A small boy on the ferry hitches his bag higher, and the bag bursts seams. Because it was old and loved, and too full of the wrong stuff. The contents cascade, a salt-stiff teddy missing an eye, 3 shells, a picture of a man with a straw hat drawn in crayon. Luffy sees the hat, and the world tilts just a hair toward a memory that is not his in this life, and is somewhere in a loop around some other admiral. He loses an inch of strength to that tilt. The dock rope jerk pulls in his grip. The ferry scrapes. For one heartbeat, the stern angles to the open channel where the current runs hard, and any drift will be a sprint to rocky mouth. Luffy chooses on instinct. He lets go of the dock and throws his body like a bridge. He plants his feet on the ferry rail, his shoulders against the stone quay. He becomes a lion made of tendons and stubbornness. "Go," he says to the kids. "Get off. Quick." They scramble. Small shoes on wood thud like rain. A Marine lieutenant sees the moment and chooses glory. He sprints along the quay with a grin like a blade. He leaps. Ace sees him. Too far to burn without burning a kid, and the calculus hates it. Jinbe cannot get there, because men do not fly, except when water helps. Law is inside a room, slicing a lock. Luffy sees the grin and the angle, and that the leap will carry the lieutenant over him, and into the ferry, and into the kids like a bowling ball into pins, and he makes a choice he will feel for the rest of his days. He lets the drum out, one beat. The world softens for a blink. The stone kisses his shoulder instead of breaking it. The rail coos like rubber. The lieutenant's trajectory turns into a wobble, and he lands like a joke in a stack of nets, instead of like a murder in a crowd. The kids laugh because it looks funny. Luffy wants to cry, and doesn't. He gives the drum back a glare that promises rules. The drum behaves. Law appears, drags the lieutenant into unconsciousness with a knuckle to a nerve. The ferry bumps the quay. The last child steps off, steps back for the teddy, steps on again, because Ace has scooped the teddy with a hand that remembers being small. The square is chaos. The lab's second wing explodes like a theory disproved. A scientist drops a clipboard and realizes he's holding evidence anyone could read. A ship outside the reef raises a flag like a threat. It's not marine standard. It's something meaner in design. A skull with 2 bars through it in black and blue. A cipher pole detachment with a boat too sleek. They weren't supposed to be early. They will trigger the thing that turns rescue into catastrophe. A buster call keyed to this island's coordinates because someone in a white room wrote the word necessary on a line and felt noble about it. A single fuse will light in a ship far offshore, and the island will stand at the bottom of a lesson. Luffy hears it as a rumor in the air, a crackle down his spine that tastes like phosphor. He runs. He runs past children being counted by a fisherman elder who's weeping in a way that says he waited years to use tears and found today. Past Ace, smacking a burning beam like a naughty dog, and laughing because fire jokes are sometimes the only way to banish fire fear. Past Jinbe holding a line of boats steady with a rope wrapped around his waist and dignity as a pulley. Past a scientist tearing the name off his coat because he doesn't want to be dragged by it when the tide changes. Past Law standing very still and counting possibilities. "Don't," Law says as Luffy blurs. "You can't punch a call." "I can punch a ship," Luffy says, not looking back. He angles across the sand, breath burning clean, now that purpose made it simple. He hits the water in 3 splashes and trusts Jinbe's lessons in reading skin pressure and the water's willingness to be a friend if you ask politely and move like you hear it. He bounds on driftwood like stepping stones and shoulders of waves like stairs. The cipher pole ship lifts out of the foam before him, sleek as a blade, black as a lie. He can see a man at the stern with a speaking tube and a finger on a lever that will send bells ringing down long chains. Kizaru arrives at that exact time because light takes its own shortcuts and obeys its own editors. He hangs in the sky in a lazy recline, legs crossed, expression like he just woke to the alarm he set for noon. "Oh," he says, "you're fast when you shouldn't be." "Hey," Luffy says without stopping, because stopping would make the calculus unsolvable. The Admiral shifts, and 3 beams thread the air in a pattern that would turn a boy into lace. Luffy ducks the first, slaps the second with a palm that overperforms, and lets the third burn a line across his shoulder. The burn smells like cooked pork and makes his stomach lurch. "Ow," he informs nobody. He reaches the hull and slaps his palms to black lacquer. He pulls and the lacquer wobbles. The ship makes a noise ships aren't supposed to make, an undignified boing that turns officers ash-faced. Kizaru sighs. "Children today," he muses, and then he gets serious in that way only the fast can. No movement, just a change in intent. He draws a sword of light as casual as a conductor lifts a baton. Luffy glances up, sees his own reflection in the blade. Young, bleeding, stubborn. He sees his wristband red like a vein on the outside. He decides to trust a trick that nearly ate him, and that will absolutely eat him if he starts treating it like a toy. He makes a small patch of hull bouncy, exactly where Kizaru's sword will bite if he chooses the angle he always chooses because elegance loves symmetry. Kizaru's blade hits the patch. The hull gives. The blade deflects with a sound like a bell struck underwater. Kizaru's eyes half close in a new respect that is mostly professional curiosity. He says. Annoying. The Cipher Paul officer yanks his lever. Nothing happens because the lever is suddenly 6 inches longer than it used to be and flops like a fish in his hand. He stares at it, then at Luffy, then at the Admiral, then at the horizon, as if hoping someone will drown him. "Sir?" he squeaks. Kizaru tilts his head. "We are all hostages of our choices, child." A battleship on the far line, one Luffy didn't see, one painted, boring gray to blend into honest weather, fires around the size of a barn. It arcs in the high, lazy way meant to break things, besides wood. Luffy's guts drop. He cannot bounce an island. He cannot bend a sky. He can watch and fail and live. He can also set the stage and let someone else be the trick. "Jinbe!" he roars, and the sea answers before the man does, because the sea loves Jinbe and recognizes his name as one of its favorite words. A wall grows, not magic, not myth. Water obeying a call built out of years. The cannonball hits the wall and sloughs into it like a man into a crowd. It comes out slow, feels old, drops like a bad decision. It explodes 100 yards too soon into foam and chastened thunder. On the beach, children cheer and then clap their mouths, embarrassed by joy under fear. Jinbe grunts. Ropes burn his palms. The line on his waist digs a bruise he'll admire later. He grins at the sea the way old friends grin after heavy boxes are moved. Kizaru closes one eye, then opens it, as if deciding whether to be the blade or the hard-to-ignore sun. "You know," he says down to Luffy mildly, "I liked you better when you were fighting on our side." "When was that?" Luffy asks, honest. "Every time you kept your power small," Kizaru says. "Every time you refused to imagine the world as a joke. You were a Marine in your heart." "Being a Marine isn't not laughing," Luffy says. He pushes off the hull as a cluster of Marines raises rifles and then lowers them because it's very hard to shoot a boy holding your ship like a misbehaving goat. Kizaru starts to move the way only light moves, then stops. He is looking at something the camera can't see. He is listening to a voice in a shell no one else can hear. A command couched as a suggestion and wrapped in velvet thread. He sighs again, theatrically. "Duty calls," he says. He vanishes into a gold streak that paints the air and lands on the beach across the island among a collection of finer targets. The lab still half standing, an official with a satchel of ugly papers. An opportunity to make a deep cut without breaking a rule that would get him a talking to. Luffy knows a feint when he smells one. The Admiral didn't want to fight him full out here, because there is a shape in which that fight ends in a cartoon and a headline. He will take the other headline. Luffy leaves the ship, leaves the lever stretched, leaves the cipher pole officer rethinking his career. He runs back, legs heavy, chest tight. He finds Ace standing before the lab doors with flames in a shape that looks like wings, and Kizaru standing opposite with his sword of light pointed down like a gentleman at a duel. The space between them hums. "Move," Kizaru says to Ace, not unkind. "No," Ace says, very kind, because the nicest thing you can do for a bully is not feed him. Kizaru moves first because he has always liked slicing arrogance. His blade flicks. Ace catches it on flame turned dense with will, the heat distorting the blade's edge into a mirage that beheads nothing. The Admiral's foot flicks sand. The sand catches light and becomes a needle cloud. Ace closes his eyes and turns it to glass with a sweep of heat that drops it harmless and pretty. Luffy arrives as the third player and makes the ground under Kizaru's front foot slick for an instant. Not enough to topple, enough to make the elegant lunge adjust by a hair. Ace's counter lands where light just wasn't. They trade a dozen beats like that. Light tastes, fire replies. Mischief arranges small stumbles and pays with nosebleed interest. Kizaru's expression never changes. Deep inside, though, there is a tickle of something like enjoyment because he rarely gets to play, and this is honest play under knives. "Enough," comes a new voice, one that makes even Kizaru's blade dim a fraction. Akainu walks up the beach like a new cliff forming. Sand fuses under his feet and crunches black. He does not look left or right, or at children, or at the lab's ridiculous door sign listing evacuation protocols in 3 languages. "You," he says to Ace, and that "you" holds hate like a family name. "And you," he says to Luffy, tone like lava under skin. "Cost me a narrative." "You taught me to love narratives," Luffy says, and it's evil how much truth lives in that. "Stand aside," Akainu tells Kizaru softly, and the light swordsman stands, not aside, but on a different vector. He shifts to patient, the older brother at the playground who will step in if the toddlers get near a cliff, but otherwise lets them break a knee so they learn. Ace cracks his neck. Luffy cracks nothing. He can feel the drum under his sternum, making a finger circle, asking pretty please. He shakes his head minutely, and the drum pouts. The decision comes in a shape Luffy hates. The lab's inside screams. Not men, paper. The satchel of evidence the scientist dropped earlier is about to light from a fallen spark. Law moves toward it with a speed he usually reserves for organs removed from the wrong place. A single Marine with the wrong orders points a rifle at the children's line. Jinbe's hands are not free. Kizaru watches too many things at once. Akainu's fist becomes a red dog. Luffy chooses to be a wall again. He expands an arm like a curtain and catches the dog. It bites and burns, and his muscles smell like lunch. He backhands the Marine's rifle into the sand, and the bullet sputters into the surf. Ace, freed for one beat by that choice, hurls fire into the lab's threshold and eats the paper's oxygen before it eats the truth, leaving the pages scorched but legible, a moral the revolutionaries will frame and mail to 10 kings. Law flows through the gap like a well-timed truth and lifts the satchel without drama. Kizaru nods once because harmony survives. Akainu's second punch is not a dog, but a hammer. Luffy doesn't have a free anything left to blunt it with. Ace does. He throws himself between hammer and brother because let the scar land on him. It'll look good later, because nothing has more gravity than habit under a choice. The hammer meets fire and drives it like a stake. Ace screams. Luffy loses his name for a second in a flood of heat that is not his, and a memory of wind that never taught him anything, because this life didn't have windmills in it, only docks with chains. The drum breaks its agreement. It hammers. Luffy opens his mouth and laughs. Not happy, not sane. A sound like he tripped and fell and decided to enjoy the fall. The ground between them bulges, dumb and cartoonish. It absorbs half the hammer. He takes the other half in his chest and goes down on one knee and tastes pennies and meat and rain, and when he rises, his grin is a bearing. Don't, Ace croaks, eyes wild, because he recognizes the edge of a cliff too well and knows what gravity did to him once. Okay, Luffy says, and wins because telling the drum no and meaning it is harder than anything he has done. He turns off the ridiculousness like a lamp. He stands human, wobbly, bleeding, holding a line with his own brittle rope. He looks at Akainu through air that quivers with wrong heat and speaks in a way that puts a sentence on the table like a knife. I'm not fighting you to win. I'm fighting you to leave. He flicks his eyes at the children behind him, at the satchel in Law's hand, at the knot on Jinbe's waist, at the ferry floating perfectly wrong. You can hit me until I stop. They'll still leave. You think this is your stage, Akainu says. You think you're a hero in a tavern song. I think I'm 19 minutes late to lunch, Luffy says, because humor is armor, and also a message to his own heart that a good stupid sentence can be the rail you grab when the ground tilts. He steps. He jabs. It's nothing. A tap. A human speed punch with black on the knuckles and stubborn on the bone. It lands under Akainu's ribs. It forces Magma to remember it has a man in it. Sakazuki's breath catches. The next punch is real. It smashes Luffy's shoulder into a new shape his body doesn't recognize. He spins with the hit, uses the spin to cover Ace's stagger, uses the cover to shuffle 3 steps toward the boats. He is not the best fighter here. He might be the best mover. He moves the fight the way a shepherd moves sheep, with suggestion and angles, and the illusion that the sheep decided to walk themselves. Kizaru huffs a sigh and flicks a beam not at Luffy or Ace, but at the mast of a boat whose rope is tangled around a child's ankle. The beam shears the rope clean. The child looks down at his free foot and up at the glowing man, and then decides to start a story later about how a Marine made a helpful cut. Kizaru's mouth twitches. He hates bad PR when it's boring. He enjoys odd PR when it's confusing. They make the water. Jinbe heaves lines and boats into paths that weren't there last week. Ace walks backward on a flame hover, so thin it's a suggestion, and glares at Akainu with a hatred that is no longer a hole, but a bridge. Luffy drags his damaged arm like a banner and refuses to look at it because looking would be permission. Law gathers the satchel under his coat like a newborn. The Cypher Paul ship reconsiders the value of its lever. Marines on the beach reassess their faith in orders written by men who weren't standing in sand. The lab burns not like a moral, but like a building. Akainu steps into the water because rules are for men who aren't fire. The water hisses. It tries to eat him. He eats back. He raises a hand to summon a long-range punch that will gut a boat. Shanks' voice lands on the beach like a sword stuck into a table in a tavern as a joke that cuts the table, and the jokes both. Enough, he says again from the deck of a ship that appeared with the rudeness of inevitability. Red hair, calm eyes, a coat that looks like a suggestion against physics. Admiral, he adds, conversational, as if speaking to someone cutting the roast too thin. Akainu looks at him with a hate he calibrates per person. Stay out of this, he says, reasonable like a man explaining arithmetic to a child. You came to Marineford to end a war. This is a mop-up. You love those. I love it when boys get to eat lunch, Shanks says, glancing at Luffy's face with a warmth he hides from everyone but the sea. And when islands don't get lessened from the sky. You'll have your PR, he continues, voice light and gentle as the edge of a cut. You'll say you broke a lab trafficking in bad data and rerouted a ferry of at-risk youths to a kinder program because a compassionate admiral intervened. He smiles at the children as if they have chocolate on their faces. Wouldn't that be nice? You don't write our story, Akainu says. No, Shanks says. You write yours. I just have better editors. Garp's laugh rolls over the water like a wave breaking somewhere behind a cliff. He isn't there. He isn't anywhere official. He sits on a pier with his legs out, listening to a radio that picked up a stray feed, and thinking about what it would have been like to put a straw hat on a boy and watch him run into the sun. He sucks a fishbone and spits it into the water with assassin's accuracy. Brat, he tells the absent, don't die before you punch me again. They leave Habu in one piece, which is more than justice or freedom expected. The island files a report full of adjectives that make a minister in a palace loosen his tie and stare out a window. The satchel's contents dribble into underground papers, then above-ground ones that pretend not to be frightened. A scientist looks at his hands for 3 days and then uses them to move boxes for a soup kitchen instead. A Marine officer with neat hair asks for a transfer to a place where people don't have to pretend they aren't people. His request is denied, and then his superior has a sudden change of heart 2 weeks later. He goes to an island with no name and a good bakery. He breathes better. Luffy's arm takes a week to remember its name. Law scolds him each morning like a rooster. Ace watches Luffy sleep with his mouth open and dreams about a fire that refuses to be anyone's tool. Jinbe fishes by night and hums by day, and talks softly with a Denden Mushi, whose voice is rough and amused. Tell him, Dragon says through static and rain, that he did what I would have asked and what I feared. What did you fear? Jinbe asks. That he would love justice so much he forgot people, Dragon says. Or love people so much he forgot what it costs to keep them alive. He's doing both badly, which means he's doing it right. He pauses. He's my son, he adds, and the word son does a thing to the line that makes Jinbe smile and say nothing. They steal rides on traded wins. shelter under the shadow of ships that do not ask names. Hitch across a sea train whose conductor pretends to be old and blind. They pick up stories like Burrs, a village that sends a piece of driftwood shaped like a hat to float in thanks. A marine canteen where a cook adds meat to stew every time a certain rumor passes. A revolutionary cell that starts calling itself the soft ground because they like the idea of making falls survivable. Not all Burrs are kind. A woman in a town with good shutters spits at their feet and tells them her boy signed up to be a Marine because he wanted to keep the sea from eating their house, and all these theatrics make his job harder. Luffy bows, genuinely sorry, because he knows the world holds more people like her than boys who want to punch bells. The chase never stops. It recedes and surges like the tide. Aokiji finds them once on a cold morning when the mist sits, fat and selfish, in a valley between dunes. He materializes like a man stepping out of a refrigerator and looks at Luffy with ocean eyes. "You could have fixed a lot from inside," he says. "I would have broken more," Luffy says. "You don't know that," Kuzan says, and he doesn't sound angry. He sounds like grief learning to be practical. He's going to break things and call the pile safety. "I'll break some of his piles," Luffy says, "and build mine badly. People can pick." He grins, and it lands soft with Kuzan, even though he tries to be stone. The Admiral sits on a block of ice he makes for himself and rubs the back of his neck. Sleepy bear. "Someday," Kuzan says, "I'll kill him, or you'll kill me, or we'll both watch something better than us take our chairs and break them for kindling." He stands, sighs, and looks at Ace. "You burn," he says in observation. "Don't burn yourself hollow again." Ace nods once, jaw hitching, because advice isn't something he knows how to wear. "I won't," he lies, then decides not to, and the decision smooths his brow a millimeter. Blackbeard comes near once or twice, his shadow lengthening over waters where fish go deep without knowing why. Luffy feels him like a greasy thought you can't make leave. Ace feels him like a headache behind his eye. They do not meet directly, because the world has places it wants that set piece, and Habu wasn't one. Teach eats a crew with a trick and laughs and then snarls when a grandmother throws a pot from a rooftop and hits at him in the ear. He vows to kill laughter at its root. He cannot find the root because it is everywhere and under rocks and at the bottom of cups and inside a boy who refuses to shut up. The new fleet admiral sharpens. He removes things with names like bureaucracy. He adds things with names like initiative. He gives Smoker a posting against Smoker's will that involves a garbage island and a precision team and nobody to answer to. Smoker calls that a blessing between curses and goes to work. He sends Kobe to a war exercise, and Kobe quickly becomes the most credible man on a field and gets punished by being told he is naive. He gives Garp a medal in absentia, because it will look good at a funeral someday. He orders a cipher to be written, a long, boring document about acceptable collateral that uses math to make death look tidy. A clerk reads it and quits. Another clerk reads it and frames it because people are different, and it's good to know which are which. On a windswept plateau of an island where grass grows like hair on a priest with a vow, Luffy and Ace spar without fire or drums, just the sound of skin and breath and small curses. Jinbe watches and critiques angles. Law leans against a rock and pretends not to care, and absolutely does. "You hit like someone who used to hit like someone else," Ace tells Luffy, wiping sweat with his forearm. You talk like someone who wants lunch, Luffy says. They laugh. They eat. They talk about flags. Luffy sketches a rough drawing in the dirt. A simple skull with a grin and a line under it that could be a smile or a horizon. Ace adds 2 paint strokes that look like fire, but could be sunrise. Jinbe shakes his head fondly because humans make signs so they can find themselves. A Denden Mushi coughs into life. It is Garp's laugh first, and then a cough because men who laugh that much must cough. It's in the rules. Brats, he says. You keeping your noses clean? I got punched in it, Luffy says cheerful. Good. Teaches it humility. Garp breathes like surf. I'm not your ally. I'm not your enemy. I'm your old man. That means I get to say what I want, and you get to ignore me. He pauses, words doing push-ups. There's a village out by Bally Point where the Marines will do something stupid in 2 days. If a group of idiots were to say, move a cart of dynamite by accident into the wrong alley at noon, that would be a shame. He hangs up. He laughs elsewhere. Luffy grins at the sky. Ace rolls his eyes. Jinbe hums. They go to Bally Point and commit an accident with a cart that knocks a planned march 10 degrees off. No one dies. A lieutenant writes a report that reads like a confession of doing the right thing at the wrong time. A mother with red hair lifts a child onto her shoulders so he can see the parade of his future, and he sees a boy in a strawless hat wave and decide to be smaller than a poster to make a joke land. It lands. The town laughs. The parade regroups. Nothing burns that wasn't supposed to be burned already. Sabaody again. They need ships. They need 700 meters of rope. They need a new way to travel that doesn't involve asking law for hospital corners. Rayleigh finds them first with a grin like a cutlass and eyes that remember gods and debts. You bend the world, he says. You have to learn to bend yourself better first. He means Haki. He means Haki like discipline, like listening, like another way to tell the drum no. He offers to teach. He leads them into the woods because real shapes learn under green shade, not under lanterns. He hits Luffy with a stick when Luffy reaches for the wrong kind of power ahead of the right. Luffy likes being hit with sticks when it teaches something. He hates being hit with doctrine. Rayleigh feeds him both in exactly the blend that makes Luffy thrive. Ace watches with arms crossed and then uncrosses them when the first trick turns into a tool. Jinbe meditates nearby and sneaks in a few corrections, like a man stirring a pot when someone else is cooking. Law's visits become rarer. He's building something elsewhere, a plan that tastes like steel and freedom. He leaves a note once. Don't die, it says, infuriatingly earnest under sarcasm. Training tastes like old sweat and new pride. Luffy learns to put his will in his skin without making a joke of it. He learns to listen for intent, the way a fisherman listens for the sound of the fish, not the splash. He learns to breathe like he is rowing a boat that does not need to get somewhere fast, only needs to not capsize. He does not stop being a clown. He does not stop laughing. He just chooses where to set the laugh like a trap door instead of a sandpit. Ace learns to shape fire into blades and blankets and handshakes. He learns to heat, not to cook. He stops shaking when people say his father's name out loud. He starts saying it sometimes with his chin up. I'm Ace, he says once to a scared kid who asks if he's the Pirate King's son, and the kid nods like that's enough. A letter arrives by pigeon because, on top of everything else, the world is old-fashioned. It is from Hancock on paper that smells like perfume in war. It says the Navy will parade the Pacifista line at a demonstration on an island that sells steel. It is a flex. It is a trap. It is also an opportunity to show the world what soft ground and clever hands can do to machines made for fear. Luffy reads it upside down because he likes the feeling. "We'll go," he says. "We won't break them. We'll embarrass them." They go. The island square is a clean geometry of power. Stage, rows, flags, a manicured crowd. The Pacifistas gleam like gold coins under a banker's lamp. Sentomaru stands with his axe and his distrust of theater. Kizaru stands to the side, pleased to play MC. Our friends, he drawls at the crowd, are very obedient. They don't laugh. The crowd titter laughs politely. He sweeps a hand and a Pacifista fires a measured beam into a wall designed to break with a satisfying sound. The crowd oohs at the script. Luffy enters at the wrong time because wrong times are his times. He drops off a fishmonger cart with a grin and a wave and says, "Hi!" And the crowd goes from ooh to ah to oh no. Ace emerges from under a canvas and flips it over a Pacifista's head with a flourish, only half for show. Jinbe steps into the path of a beam that would have tidally cut a symbol in the air and sends it into the sky, where it writes the word "no" on a cloud. Kizaru says "tisk" without using his tongue. The point is not to destroy. The point is to make the machine look silly without making the man operating it look dead. Luffy slaps a palm to a Pacifista's ankle, and the machine steps into a scoop he created and falls onto its back like a turtle. Ace heats the air in front of a laser buckshot so the beams refract and draw a cartoon mustache on a billboard of the Fleet Admiral. The crowd laughs against its will. Laughter is contagious. A Pacifista rotates to recalibrate, and Luffy puts his hatless head under its foot, and it stops because the algorithm did not account for faces that look like kids. Sentomaru drops his axe into the stage with a thunk that silences the square. He glares. "That's enough," he says. He's not wrong. The point is made. The government's press team will spin it. The people who saw it will remember a boy making a gun sit down. They leave before the trap closes. The trap still closes. Marines flood alleys. Admirals evaporate and condense with physics in their pockets. Kizaru flashes ahead on a rooftop and calls down, "You really do love making my job interesting." "Why don't you quit?" Luffy calls back bluntly. The question drops into a silence, then a murmur. Kizaru smiles a small smile, like a man remembering a joke that only he thinks is funny. "Where would I shine?" he says, and disappears because he cannot afford to answer seriously. Finally, a month after Marineford by the calendar and a century by the body, the brothers stand on a cliff that overlooks a shipyard where flags multiply like weeds. Luffy throws a pebble. It bounces 7 times and sinks on the 8th, as if performing for a child. Ace sits with his arms looped around his knees and chews a blade of grass. "We could make something," he says. "Not the old thing, not the Whitebeard thing, not the marine thing, not the revolutionary thing. Something dumb and sharp. A crew that picks fights with rules and pays tabs." "Meat," Luffy says, which is short for agreeing to everything under the sun. He runs through names in his head like a kid rummaging in a drawer. He thinks about a navigator who will punch him when storms flirt. He thinks about a swordsman who will look at him like a question mark turned exclamation point. He thinks about a cook who will burn with honor and steak. He thinks about a doctor with a big heart and a weird laugh. He thinks about a ship that will know his feet, and a flag that will make kids grin, and men scowl, and women roll their eyes fondly. We'll need a ship, he says aloud, and people who aren't just us. We'll need to not die, Ace says, practical and also a lover of drama. He stands. He dusts grass off. He looks at the horizon, and the horizon looks back as if they've been arguing in letters for years, and finally meet at a cafe. Let's make a mess worth cleaning, he says. They do. They will. In a cabinet in Marijois, a file labeled Monkey D. Luffy, Disposition, thickens with reports that contradict in tone and agree in impact. In a coffin carved out of the earth and decorated with stories, a mustached man sleeps under dirt that grows flowers with too much personality. In a village with a windmill that creaks like a joint, a woman wipes a glass and tells 3 different versions of a story to 3 sailors and takes their coins with 3 different smiles. In a room without windows, a man who laughs at storms and calls himself a captain sharpens a knife and plans to carve his name into the moon. In a bar in Sabaody, a child draws a skull on a napkin and doesn't know why his hand makes the line just so. In an office, a new fleet admiral signs a paper and sets it on fire and lights a cigar with it and tells himself that the flavor tastes like order. In a forest at night, a boy in a blue coat sleeps with a straw hat as a pillow in a world that didn't happen here and wakes smiling. And a drum that lives under the story of the sea smiles back, patient, hungry, waiting for the next time someone dares it to play.